Good day. We're here with Steve Martindale, who is the program coordinator and marketing manager for the Salt Spring Film Festival. And we're talking about The Last Waltz, which is part of the Best of the Fests series that the film festival is running at Art Spring. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you for having me, Damian.
Yeah, now we're putting on The Last Waltz, and we're a co-sponsor with the film festival. This is coming up on December the 6th at Art Spring at 7:30 p.m. Tell me why you decided to screen this film.
Well, the film festival runs half a dozen films at Art Spring over the course of the fall and winter, leading up to our festival in March. And we choose films that that we think are going to be of interest to the public. And most of our films the films in our festival are documentaries, although at Art Spring we also show narrative films and dramas. This one, The Last Waltz, was re-released across the country this month in November to commemorate the 45th anniversary of the film. And it was done because Robbie Robertson died in August. And so to remember Robbie Robertson, this film has been re-released. It's the 45th anniversary of the film, and I guess it's about the 47th anniversary of the concert, which is depicted in the film. For people who don't know, The Last Waltz is widely considered to be the best concert film of all time, directed by Martin Scorsese, featuring the band and a whole host of fantastically talented musical guests. Released in 1978, although the concert itself was, I believe, November 25th, 1976. In the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco.
Right, yeah. Bill Graham production, I believe, on Thanksgiving Day, apparently.
Yeah, so we're approaching American Thanksgiving very shortly, and it's the 45th anniversary of the film's release in 78. It won some prizes at festivals when it was released, and it's considered a classic now. A lot of people, of course, have seen it, so we weren't entirely sure if it was going to work for us to include it, but it was being done across the country, and we thought we wanted to get in on that. And we thought it was an opportunity for people to see the film on the big screen with high quality sound. The film's been completely redone, although it's the same film people will have seen in the past, but it's been remastered. So it's got high definition video, and it's got improved sound quality, remastered 5.1 sound. And Art Spring has recently improved their sound equipment. So it should look and sound great. And of course, people can watch this film at home, but we've already sold quite a lot of tickets to this film. So obviously there is a demand for it on the island for people to come and see this film on the big screen. And I hope people will join us.
Yeah, it sounds great, and I'm looking forward to seeing it myself. Let's take a quick break. I'm just going to play a track from the film. The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, with the band, with The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. And the number of people on this film, it's quite astonishing, isn't it? Dylan, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Muddy Waters, to name but a few. There's Dr. John, a whole raft of them.
Van Morrison, did you mention Van Morrison?
I didn't mention Van, no.
Ringo Starr, Eric Clapton. The one that really struck me when I first saw this film was the Staple Singers, because I wasn't familiar with them. Right. They were very involved in the civil rights movement, and that was before my time. And the Staple Singers are featured in this film. Mavis Staples and I believe her sisters and her father sing on The Wait, when they sing the song The Wait.
Yeah, we'll
they're
play that later on.
They're just spectacular. I was so taken with the Staple Singers, and then of course from there look them up and learn more about them.
What's your view on the claim that it's the best concert film ever?
I can't think of another one that is as well done. I mean, first of all, it's an amazing concert. The concert itself is incredible. The music, the special guests, it's just astounding. But also the way it's filmed. It's Scorsese and world famous cinematographers whose names I will probably mispronounce. And they use 7 cameras to capture this concert. So it's quite different from just sort of a single camera in the front row filming a concert. It's much more immersive than that. You feel like you're on stage with these people and behind them and beside them, and then the film also features backstage interviews with the band about their backstory and ultimately why they're breaking up. This was their farewell concert,
right.
So they were choosing to disband at that point, having enjoyed huge success, and so they're interviewed about what led to that choice.
Yeah, I did a bit of research on this, and apparently the cameramen, including in their credits, were Raging Bull, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and also Easy Rider.
Oh, yeah. I'll try to pronounce their names, and I apologize. I think it's Hungarian, Laszlo Kovacs and Vilmos Zsigmond.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they're Oscar-winning cinematographers, very highly regarded. It's just a spectacular film, and as I said, the performances are amazing. Just the level of intimacy that it's better than being there, because if you're there, depending on where you're sitting, you may not see so well a concert like this. But this, you're so up close and personal with the performers.
Yeah. Funnily enough, Levon Helm didn't like it, apparently. In his biography later on, he said that he didn't think that Scorsese devoted enough time to Richard Manuel and Garth Hudson.
That's probably why those are the two that I can't name.
Yeah, right.
I know Rick Danko and Robbie Robertson, of course, and Levon Helm.
Right.
For people who don't know Levon Helm, he also tried his hand at acting. If you remember The Coal Miner's Daughter with Sissy Spacek, he played her father. From 1980, I believe that film was. So he had a couple of acting credits before his death.
And a lot of solo albums after the band, too. Yeah.
And, of course, the band originally started out as the backing band for Ronnie Hawkins.
Yes.
In Toronto. And we had a film a few years ago that we showed at Art Spring called Once We're Brothers, Robbie Robertson and the band.
Yes.
And it was Robbie Robertson looking back on his years with the band.
Right.
And they described some of that, of how they began as a backing band for Ronnie Hawkins.
They were called the Hawks in those days. Yeah. I think I did a show on Robbie Robertson at the time, and a lot of his talking about his time with Ronnie Hawkins, and Ronnie Hawkins said that he would not be able to pay him much, but he would meet a lot of girls. So that was...
There's that, yeah. Robbie Robertson was such an interesting character. He died at the age of 80 in August. And if I remember correctly, his father was Jewish and his mother was Indigenous. And so he had connections to the Six Nations
yes, he did,
reserve near Brantford, Ontario, where I used to live about 100 years ago. And so he would go back and forth between the city and the reserve, and had that cultural connection with his mother's side.
He was killed in a mysterious car accident on the Queen Elizabeth Expressway, apparently, and there was some suggestions that he had some kind of connection to the mob.
To the mob, yeah. I remember hearing something about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a very interesting guy, hugely talented. And then, of course, after the band broke up, he had a solo career. And later in life, he was very involved in doing soundtracks for films.
Yes.
So he had quite a number of credits for films people have probably seen that they're just unaware that he was involved with.
Yeah. Okay, well, Ronnie Hawkins was one of my favorites. Actually, when I used to live in Hamilton, Ontario many years ago, I used to see Ronnie Hawkins play at the local pubs with his newest backing band. And let's hear Ronnie Hawkins at the Last Waltz playing with the band, Who Do You Love?
Thank you, Ronnie. Aha!
Okay, that was Ronnie Hawkins and Who Do You Love? Interesting film. That I did a bit more research on it, and a bit of backstory which we won't see in the movie, but kind of interesting stuff was that apparently at the intermission of the concert, Dylan suddenly decided that he didn't want to have his songs actually filmed, despite the fact that the Scorsese and the band had done a deal with the distributors and everybody else that he would be in it. And so Bill Graham had to go back and persuade him, and he eventually agreed to have the last two songs he did filmed, and those are the ones that you actually see in the movie. He did actually perform, I think, 6 songs, but they couldn't show the rest of them because he wouldn't allow it. So those kind of things were interestingly going on in those days, even then.
I wasn't aware that he had performed. I mean, obviously the film doesn't capture the entire concert. I don't know how many hours it went on for, but they show you the highlights.
Yeah, it went on for 5 hours. Apparently.
Oh, okay. And the film is under 2 hours long, and it includes interviews, so you don't get the whole concert for sure. But the story about Bob Dylan is kind of in keeping with what little I know about him. He does sound a bit fickle.
Yeah, and apparently there were some big jam sessions at the end, which we don't get to see either, but...
And do you think that footage still exists of the full 5-hour concert?
I have no idea.
See, in those days, often when the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, they would destroy.
Yeah.
Which seems like such a shame now. And sometimes, even today, they're still occasionally digging out old celluloid that was, stuff that was cut out, footage cut out from films, or original cuts of films that were longer are occasionally still being found. But unless they've been stored properly, they'll have deteriorated by now. Yeah. Celluloid doesn't last except in really pristine conditions.
Right.
So if any kind of dampness gets to it, it's over. So and then for space, a lot of the studios would go through and for storage space, they would just destroy old celluloid. Yeah. And a lot of footage has been lost, and there are some films that were released in Hollywood in the early days of which there is no copy remaining because nobody thought to keep one.
I think the same thing happened with a lot of the old BBC programs, that they destroyed all the original tapes sometime in the 60s of some of the early classics.
Yeah, it seems so short-sighted. Yeah. And of course now we can store everything digitally, but at the time, you needed a warehouse, you needed climate control, you had to have vaults to store this stuff in properly. But, it seems pretty important to hang on to this kind of stuff, but it's irreplaceable.
Yeah. Now, apparently, Martin Scorsese did, as he does for every film, he storyboarded each song. He got a song list ahead of time from everybody, and he figured out which cameras he was going to use at which points during the show. And he apparently was on the headset, calling the shots and everything.
It's quite a production. We just showed our first film of the season was Swan Song, that we showed on November 15th about the National Ballet of Canada and Karen Kane's final production of Swan Lake.
Film, yeah.
You were there, and we had one of the filmmakers there with us, and he talked about, Sean O'Neill was one of the filmmakers who attended, and he talked about how complicated it is for them to be filming a live performance, or even the rehearsals, because they want the cameras really close to the performers, but of course as the performers are moving around the stage, they can't be bumping into the cameras.
Right.
So the camera crew have to know the whole production in order to get out of the way in time. And then in a live performance, both for Swan Lake and for this concert, of course, you can't have the camera crew interfering with the audience's enjoyment of the show. So it's got to be done discreetly. So it's very complex.
Yeah. Okay, let's play one more tune, and then we'll come back and wrap up with Steve Martindale. You're listening to CHiR.fm, the voice of the Gulf Islands. My name is Damian Inwood, and I'll be back in a minute after we hear The Wait. Mavis Staples and the Staples Singers singing background vocals, fantastic.
Not just background vocals, but they do some of the verses as well. Yeah. And that's Mavis Staples you hear right at the end whispering, beautiful, just at the end of the song.
Yeah.
She's such a talent. She's still touring. She must be in her early 80s by now, Mavis Staples.
Yeah, well, that was a different time back then. I actually saw the film when it first came out, giving away my age. Of course, back then it was sex and drugs and rock and roll, and Martin Scorsese admitted afterwards that he had been doing a ton of cocaine at the time. And apparently Neil Young, they had to airbrush out in the post of the film some white powder on the end of his nose. So
none of that surprises me. It was a different era, as you say. For people who may not be familiar with the band, maybe some of our younger listeners, of course, they were, a huge deal at the time in the 60s and 70s. And they had a particular sound that I find so interesting because it was, what would you call it, like Americana?
Yeah.
Grassroots. What terms would you use to describe their sound?
Well, it was the early form of Americana, I think, which has become an accepted phrase these days for people like Mary Gauthier and other people like that.
It's an interesting thing because, the 60s was such a progressive era in so many ways, socially and politically, but musically, some of these performers were hearkening back to an earlier era of folk music, and the band was one of them. And you can see it in their clothing, on the album covers. These references to the earlier years in America,
about the American Civil War and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they have a particular sound that was, it wasn't so much a contemporary sound. It was a more of a classic sound. The songs that Robbie Robertson wrote, and he did write most of the songs, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Robbie Robertson.
And Lee Van Helm.
They had this sound as if they'd always existed, as if they had just sort of been discovered, or possibly they were covering music that from an earlier era, but in fact they were creating it at the time.
And of course, they were 4 Canadians and 1 American,
mm-hmm.
so it was very much of a Canadian band. And yeah, I think just looking back to their whole career of when they moved down to New York and did the basement tapes with Bob Dylan and all kinds of interesting stuff. Music from the Big Pink is one of their classic albums.
If people have the opportunity, have a look for that film, Once We're Brothers, Robbie Robertson and the band. We showed it a few years ago, and it was the first film directed by a young Toronto filmmaker named Daniel Rower, and he went on to make the film Navalny, which last year was nominated, actually won both the Oscar and the BAFTA for Best Documentary. So he's done very well in his career. And Once We're Brothers is his first film. And he was very young. I think he was about 26 when that film came out. So young enough that he wouldn't have been alive when any of this stuff was happening. But he managed to make that film. And as I say, we screened it at Art Spring a few years ago. And we're looking forward to screening this one as well, The Last Waltz, which we're showing on December 6th at Art Spring. And people can get tickets from the Art Spring website. They're $13 each. They're available online or in person or by phone with the Art Spring box office.
Okay, and tell us a bit more about the upcoming films next year, too. You have 3 more films, I think.
We've got 3 more in the new year. We're actually not 100% certain which they're going to be, but we're pretty sure at this stage. We've got a beautiful narrative film from Spain that we like to show called 20,000 Species of Bees. And it's won a bunch of prizes around the world at festivals. And it's one of our favorite dramas that we saw this year. It's just lovely. And we're also we believe we're also showing a film called Call Me Dancer, which is from India, about a young dance student who tries to make it big internationally. We've got great films coming up, and our festival is March 1st to 3rd.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming in, Steve. It's been a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll get some more bums in seats for this show and for shows coming up in the new year. And of course, the film festival itself is coming in March, right?
March 1st to 3rd at the high school, and the screenings prior to that are all at Art Spring.
Right. Okay, well, thanks so much for coming, and you've been listening to CHiR.fm. My name is Damian Inwood with Steve Martindale from the Salt Spring Film Festival.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.